Apple Store workers to get bonuses of $1,000 in rare move. Apple's doing an unprecedented thing, at least in the history of its operations, where in the month of October, it's going to give Apple retail store employees as much as $1,000 in one-time bonuses. A couple details on kind of how this is going to roll out, according to an article in Bloomberg, is that any employee or retail employee that's been with the business prior to March 31st is going to get $1,000 in a one-time bonus. Anyone who joined after March 31st is going to get $500, and then anybody who's even newer than that will get $200. It's an interesting move from an employer brand standpoint because Apple, by virtue of its size and its influence in the tech space and then just in the labor force in general, has outsized influence. So, the other companies are going to look to this and say, okay, is this something that we need to do as well? In the midst of the labor shortages that we're seeing, in the midst of all the different dynamics that are in play around work at the minute. It's an important time for Apple when we think about kind of their year or their fiscal year. I mean, situationally, they just had their rollout. They just did their launch event, so they just rolled out the new phone. They've done a few things here, so a retail presence, or at least a strong retail presence, is going to be very important to them, especially as we come into the end of the year here. We run into Thanksgiving, Black Friday here in the States, the holiday season at the end of the year. So their retail footprint is going to be incredibly important, and we've talked about this in prior episodes, but it's so expensive for Apple not to have optimal staffing levels at their retail level. And so this is just kind of a preemptive move, I think, to make sure that they have their retail staff on board as they go into this year end. Just a little bit of napkin math as we were reading this. Apple retail in the US at least has around 30,000 employees. So just, average it out so that you give $1,000 to all 30,000. That's a $30 million balance sheet move that Apple is pulling here to make sure that they have staff on site and on board as they go into the year end. So, but then of course, for perspective, you weigh that up with how much this brand makes and their cash position. So, it's really a drop in the bucket for Apple, but for other companies and maybe companies that are operating on a smaller basis who are maybe facing the same questions, at least, that Apple will be facing going into the end of the year, especially if you're a retail driven brand. You got to think about, is this a move that companies will need to do because workers, especially right now in this macroeconomic situation, are looking around at different companies and really picking and choosing, the benefits that they want to go for, and for example, a $2 shift or a $2 bump in hourly wage is enough for somebody to switch positions at the minute. We're seeing a lot of people ghosting, or at least job candidates ghosting after a few days of work. Granted, a lot of companies tie signing on bonuses to be duration, but in the chances that they are, we're seeing people kind of shift here and there so that they can get as much pay as possible while the choppy waters still exist in the labor market. So it's an interesting move on Apple's part. I think it's one that signals to the market that they're taking their labor base seriously. It comes at an interesting time for Apple with of course the retail cycle going into the end of the year, but they're also facing a bit of unrest with a couple of social issues, at least internally. So a lot probably goes into this, but definitely something to keep an eye on as employer brand practitioners, as marketers, and something that I think we may start to see more brands jump on board, especially the ones that are retail driven, as we come into the end of the year here, when everybody's fighting for a talent base that's shrinking, it looks like, or at least is stagnant, and needs the workers to make sure that they can maximize their revenues during prime shopping season as we come to the end of the year.